Cast your mind back 3 whole years and you may recall I reviewed a Phanteks Evolv Shift X case which was mini ITX and monumentally tall. It stood 650mm high. Small footprint, very tall. Lay it down, quite large. In addition to the Shift X, there was also a Shift which was significantly smaller. However, I never reviewed the Shift, only the Shift X. This Phanteks Evolv Shift 2 is an evolution of that Shift and is a very similar size. So we have a relatively large ITX case that supports a 120mm liquid cooler at the rear. Air comes in the bottom, power supply is SFX or SFXL. The claim is it supports a full-size graphics card. A regular Evolv Shift 2 has glass on the side panels, but this is the Evolved Shift 2 Air with fabric side panels. So in addition to the air flowing in the bottom, out the back and out of the top, we've also got the sides acting as air passages. And that's a big change over a conventional case. The thing is about the Phanteks Shifts Various is that they're now competing with the Cooler Master NR200, which is also mini ITX, also supports a full-size graphics card. And let's face it, it's tiny and it's also fairly cheap. So Phanteks has some strong competition in the performance enthusiast mini ITX market. Before I can show you inside the Shift 2 Air, as you know, I have to do the peel. However, we have no glass whatsoever. Therefore, we have no protective plastic. So today's peel is the non-existent peel. And that sounds like a jolly good time for you to hit the subscribe button and to ring the bell. Onward! We pop open the top. I'll do that again so you can see how easy it is. Look at that. Substantial mechanism, nicely done. And then we have a series of thumb screws, 2 per panel. Captive thumb screws, really neat. And you can see it's a fairly coarse mesh, however it does double up as a filter. Front panel is aluminium with some air filtration mesh, and the mounting mechanism, which is plastic, is screwed into place. Similar deal with the rear, machined aluminium, air filtration mesh, and the mounting mechanism. And if we go to the bottom, literally pulls off. So that has an air filter. This gives us a good chance to have a look at the single supplied fan, which is obviously a Phanteks branded fan. We can, if we choose, add another fan in the floor or a second fan there. We cannot add a fan in the roof of the case because that's where the rear I/O of the motherboard's going to go. Mini ITX pointing upwards and then the cables come out, so we can't add any cooling there. We have a PCI Express Gen 3 riser installed, and then the full-length graphics card will hang down here. So there's loads of space for a graphics card on this side of the case. SFX power supply goes in the floor of the case, and because this is the Air model, the power supply can intake from the side. You can be confident it's going to look a lot clearer when I've got some hardware installed. The motherboard I'm going to use is a Gigabyte Z490i Aorus Ultra, I for ITX. Processor is an Intel Core i5 10600. SSD is a WD Blue, and that goes under this little heatsink here. Memory is 32GB of Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4 3600. My plan is to use this Barrow CPU block and water pump unit, which is going to go on like so. And the good thing here is we've got a peel. It's a very quiet peel, but it's a peel. And now we put the board in the case. To create a bit more room, I simply remove this logo plate, which is held in place with magnets. This seems like a good time to mention the front I/O panel, which is all the way down here and consists of those two USB type A ports, which as we can see are USB 3s, which means that this cable is going to connect there. With the motherboard assembly installed, it's time for the power supply, which is a Seasonic Focus SG650, so it's an SFX-L. Power supply installed, cables routed. I've installed an intake fan on the bottom. It's a Noctua Chromax 120. As you can see, the location of the power supply means you definitely want to install that fan before you put the power supply in place. And then we come to storage. A 3.5-inch hard drive, screws and rubbers mount there. Drive slips into these holes. And like so. There's a caddy, which is a double decker, so it can hold two 2.5-inch SATA drives. That is installed on these 4 rubbers, so the graphics cable goes beneath it. Alternatively, you could move this caddy up to this pattern of 4 screws here, or more likely you could buy an accessory caddy from Phanteks and install 2 SSDs there. I'd say cables down actually, and 2 SSDs there. But in terms of storage, we've got multiple options. That's my PC built and I'm ready to do thermal testing, and I have to say it's been a bit of a struggle. Cable routing is tricky. There are occasions where I wish there was a hole here rather than a hole there. The logo plate that should go here won't go in place because I've chosen to go custom loop, mini custom loop, and the hoses are too thick to allow the logo plate to go in. So that's my fault. If you're using an AIO with the standard skinny rubber tubes, I don't think it'd be an issue. It's time to do some thermal testing and then I'll wrap up this video. I've struggled with the Shift 2 Air, so let me give you a couple of hints and tips so if you decide to build a PC inside this case, you'll be better informed. The very first thing you should do is install an intake fan in the bottom of the case before you put any other hardware inside. That makes life a great deal easier. Secondly, put your graphics card in the graphics card caddy. And doesn't that sound peculiar? That's very often the final thing you do in a build. You need to do this, and the reason is because you cannot just put the card in place. You have to remove the graphics card caddy, put the card in and install the assembly. Okay, there are 2 screws easily accessible on the graphics card side of things, and there's 1 hidden thumb screw on this, points to the correct side of the case, this side of the case, which is right behind the bundle of cables. And getting that in once everything else is together is a nightmare, believe you me. So that's the second job. After that, you need to decide on your cooling system, and this is where, for me, the Shift 2 Air is a very confused case. We've got mesh on both sides that work superbly well. I'll come to that in just a moment. So an air-cooled build makes sense. This case features the fact it can hold a full-length graphics card up to 2.9 slots thick, i.e. a full-thickness graphics card. And you can have obviously the intake fans right up against the mesh side panels, no problem whatsoever. So an air-cooled graphics card's the way to go. I had considered putting a liquid-cooled graphics card inside this case, and then I thought, no, I'm restricted to a 120mm radiator. That makes absolutely no sense. Now this is where the confusion kicks in. When it comes to the type of cooler on your CPU, air coolers for ITX cases, they are restrictive. Particularly it's the keep out area on the motherboard that's the real issue, not so much the height you have in the case, although both are a factor. Do you put an all-in-one on the CPU? Actually, in this instance, a 120 all-in-one would have been a good idea, but no, I went for custom loop. Why did I do that? Why did I do that stupid thing? It's part of the specification of this case that if you use an SFX power supply, you have more thickness available for your radiator. You can go for a 45mm 120mm rad. If you have an SFX-L power supply, as I did, you're limited to a conventional 30mm radiator. I'm not aware of any AIOs 120mm with 45mm rads, so that says to me custom loop. So I went down that route, and I really wish I hadn't done it. Furthermore, there's no space in this case for a conventional pump reservoir unit, which I went for the Barrow integrated unit. It's a CPU block and pump and reservoir all in one unit. It works, but it's the only solution I can think of that's likely to work in this case for a custom loop. And I'm advising you, while the Barrow parts worked, not to do this. The thing is, I'm not certain whether the right move is a 120 AIO or an air cooler. They each have their strengths, they each have their weaknesses. If you're building a gaming PC, and let's face it, full-length graphics card up to 2.9 slots, that's gaming PC territory, or maybe even workstation. If you're doing that, you want a decent processor. Now, I wimped out. I went for a Core i5-10600, not even the K. Good processor, but not exactly high-end. This system's drawing 400 watts under load. The graphics card is 230 watts. And the upshot is the system behaved nicely, but if you went for a 200 watt processor, would you really be happy with a 120mm liquid cooler on it? Nah, I'm not so sure. On the other hand, an air cooler, low profile probably, in an ITX chassis with a 200 watt processor, also, nah. So what is this case? That's my question. What is it? We've got the air version with the mesh side panels, and they work well, but if it had been glass, I mean, I hate to think what the thermals will be. As it is, this air version, the thermals are absolutely fine. I tested it with the fans on full blast, with the top open, the side panels off, and with the fan set at 50%. The Phanteks fan that comes with the case is rated at 1500 RPM. The two Noctua Chromaxes I installed, also 1500 RPM. The maths is easy. Full noise is about 1500. It's not quite right. They're actually 1370, 1470 and 1350. Noctua is about 10% off. Phanteks pretty much spot on. And with those fans running at full speed, blimey, it's quite noisy. Here are some samples. First, full blast. And then half speed. And at the moment I've got the fan set on silent. So the system can be perfectly quiet, but at full noise it really is noisy. The thing is, the side panels, the mesh panels, while I'm quite convinced they work well as air filters and they also help flow air, they are essentially non-existent. They cut no noise whatsoever. So if you've got a full-on PC in this chassis, I'm quite certain it's going to be rackety. Another feature that baffles me somewhat is the RGB that Phanteks has included. Their RGB systems are absolutely excellent. I love them to bits. The RGB is working here, and it's in the top of the case. And I just don't see the point. It's like a little activity, like glowing away practically. Utterly futile. And yet the thing is, if you were to extend the RGB to a strip or a pump res or a graphics block or whatever, well, you're not going to have a graphics block in this case. Pump res has no place. Lighting strip, I don't see it. Therefore, the RGB for me, it makes very little sense. Their RGB works. It's just inappropriate and unnecessary in this case. The pricing of this case at £90 in the UK is absolutely fine. No argument there. So who is this case aimed at? I don't know. It's presumably aimed at a gamer who's happy to compromise with an ITX board with an SFX SFXL power supply, who doesn't mind shrieking when they're doing the assembly as they discover they're meant to put the fan in before they did the power supply or whatever. The upshot for me is that the Evolv Shift to Air is a confused and confusing case. Over the last number of years, I've reviewed a great many cases. A fair few of those were Phanteks. I think I understand Phanteks quite well. I do not understand the Evolv Shift to Air.